The freezing wind howled against the bulletproof glass, but inside the dark cabin, it was perfectly quiet. I was shaking, the last of the adrenaline finally burning out of my system. Camilla pulled me close, gently draping her heavy trench coat over both of our shoulders. She wrapped her arm fiercely around my waist, pulling me against her side to share her warmth. For the first time since the oil rig exploded, we were finally safe. Then, the sleek black phone in her hand vibrated sharply. A pale, eerie green light cut through the dark, illuminating the small space between us. I looked up and watched the untouchable Alpha Queen completely shatter. Her glacial eyes widened in absolute chilling horror as she stared at the encrypted screen. "Beautiful explosion, little sister," the text read. "I see you found grandfather's toy. Now, bring it to me." I looked at her trembling hands, my blood suddenly running cold. "Camilla, who is that?" "My brother," she whispered into the freezing dark, her voice entirely hollow. "He died 10 years ago." The freezing salt spray felt like shattered glass against my skin as the matte black interceptor tore through the violent swells of the Atlantic. We had been running blind through the dense, suffocating fog for what felt like an eternity. The sheer power of the twin engines sent continuous, bone-rattling vibrations up through the reinforced deck, making my teeth ache. I stood close to the helm, my hands gripping the polished metal railing so tightly that my knuckles had turned entirely white. Behind us, the jagged coastline of the cliff and the heavily armed mercenaries who had tried to end our lives were completely swallowed by the gray abyss. But the phantom echo of the automatic gunfire still rang sharply in my ears, a brutal reminder of exactly how narrow our escape had been. I turned my head slightly, watching the woman standing at the digital controls. Camilla Vance did not look like a billionaire heiress who had just been hunted out of her own safe house. She looked like a warship commander who had finally been given the green light to engage the enemy. The soft, vulnerable girl I had held in the dark tunnels was completely gone, replaced by the terrifying, brilliant architect of a global counteroffensive. The blue light from the navigation screens cast sharp, calculating shadows across the aristocratic lines of her face. Her wet, pale blonde hair was pushed back from her forehead, and her glacial blue eyes were locked onto the pulsing red coordinate on the digital radar. She was entirely in her element, navigating the treacherous offshore currents with a ruthless mechanical precision. "The fog is going to break in 20 minutes, Camilla stated, her voice carrying easily over the deafening roar of the engines. "We are crossing into international waters." I stepped closer to her, the heavy dark coat doing very little to block the biting ocean wind. "And once we cross that line?" I asked, my voice slightly raspy from the cold. "Are we entirely off the Syndicate's grid?" Camilla reached out without looking away from the radar, her cold fingers wrapping securely around my wrist. "Victoria Sterling owns satellites that can read the serial number on a dime from outer space, Nadia. We are never entirely off her grid. But this interceptor is coated in a military-grade radar-absorbent polymer. To her orbital trackers, we currently look like a flock of seagulls or a rogue wave." She released my wrist and adjusted the dual throttles, dropping our speed slightly as the massive waves began to even out. "But that illusion will only last until we reach the coordinates." I looked up at the encrypted display. The pulsing red dot was no longer a vague destination halfway across the world. It was exactly 10 nautical miles dead ahead. "What exactly is at those coordinates, Camilla?" I asked, staring out into the endless gray expanse of the ocean. "You said the Black Ledger is a decentralized network, but it has a physical anchor." "My father spent 5 years searching Swiss vaults and subterranean bunkers in Geneva," Camilla replied, a dark, cynical smile curving her lips. "He was looking for a pristine, climate-controlled server room built by corporate engineers. He fundamentally misunderstood who my grandfather actually was." She tapped a sequence of keys on the secondary console, and the digital map zoomed in on the red dot. Elias Vance didn't trust banks, he didn't trust governments, and he certainly didn't trust his own son. He built the Vance empire in the boardroom, but he built his insurance policy in the shadows. The thick, gray wall of fog ahead of us finally began to be thin, tearing apart in wispy, translucent shreds as the morning sun fought to break through the clouds. Through the dissipating mist, a massive, jagged silhouette began to materialize on the dark horizon. It looked like a colossal, rusted metal monster rising directly out of the churning black water. My breath hitched in my throat as the sheer, terrifying scale of the structure came into focus. It was a decommissioned, deep-sea oil drilling platform. It was entirely abandoned, covered in decades of dark orange rust, creeping green algae, and jagged barnacles. Its massive steel pillars plunged violently into the freezing ocean, and its towering derricks pierced the low-hanging clouds like skeletal fingers. "A rig?" I whispered, utterly stunned by the desolate, terrifying sight. "It's been officially listed as a condemned environmental hazard since 1998, Camilla explained, her eyes fixed in the rusted behemoth. It sits exactly on the fault line of 3 overlapping international maritime borders. No single sovereign nation has the legal jurisdiction to board it without triggering an international diplomatic crisis. It is the perfect, untouchable blind spot. And it is completely wired with the most advanced, autonomous cooling systems on the planet, drawing power directly from the geothermal vents on the ocean floor." I stared at the platform as we rapidly approached it. It looked like a ghost ship, a terrifying relic left to rot in the middle of nowhere. "The server farm is inside that thing?" I asked, feeling a cold, creeping sense of dread settling in my stomach. "The physical servers are submerged 100 feet below the rig, housed in a pressurized titanium capsule," Camilla corrected softly. "But the manual access terminal, the only place on Earth where the biometric sequence can be entered to initialize the ledger, is in the primary control tower." She pulled the throttles back violently, and the interceptor's engines dropped to a low, throaty growl. We glided into the dark, churning water beneath the massive, rusted steel platform. The sheer size of the pillars made the military-grade boat feel like a plastic toy. The sound of the ocean slamming against the hollow metal struts was deafening, echoing like continuous thunder in the artificial cavern beneath the rig. Camilla expertly maneuvered the interceptor toward a hidden, narrow service dock tucked behind a rusted intake pipe. "Grab the mooring line," she commanded, throwing the engines into reverse to stall our momentum. I moved to the bow, leaning over the slick metal railing. I grabbed the heavy, salt-encrusted rope and expertly looped it around the rusted iron cleat on the hidden dock. The boat bumped gently against the rubber bumpers, coming to a complete, swaying halt. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sloshing of the dark water and the eerie, metallic groaning of the massive rig swaying in the ocean wind. We were completely alone, miles away from any civilization, hovering over a $1 trillion digital ghost. Camilla powered down the navigation consoles and pulled the heavy set of keys from the ignition. She turned to me, the blue light of the screens fading, leaving us in the dim, natural shadows beneath the platform. She didn't move toward the exit immediately. Instead, she stepped close to me, the swaying of the boat forcing our bodies to brush against each other. She reached into the pocket of her black trench coat and pulled out a heavy, matte black tactical flashlight. "Once we climb that ladder, there is no going back, Nadia," she said, her voice dropping to a fierce, intimate whisper. "If I indigenize the Black Ledger, Victoria Sterling's syndicate will instantly be alerted to the exact location of the servers. We will have exactly 15 minutes to download the encrypted blackmail files before her offshore strike teams converge on this platform." I looked up into her glacial blue eyes, seeing the absolute, uncompromising fire burning within them. She was giving me a choice. She was offering me one last chance to stay on the boat, to run away from the impending war. I reached out, my hand wrapping over hers where she held the flashlight. "I didn't walk into a corporate boardroom and blow up your father's empire just to hide on a boat, Camilla. I told you I wasn't running." A soft, breathtaking smile broke across her face, completely shattering the Ice Queen armor for one flawless, beautiful second. She leaned in, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to the corner of my mouth. It was a quiet anchor in the middle of the storm, a reminder of exactly what we were fighting to protect. "Then let's go steal $1 trillion, she whispered against my skin. We turned and vaulted over the railing of the interceptor, landing silently on the rusted metal grating of the service dock. The air smelled intensely of sulfur, rotting kelp, and old machine oil. Camilla clicked on the tactical flashlight, the blinding white beam cutting through the gloom.
She pointed it upward, illuminating a terrifyingly steep, rusted spiral staircase that wound its way up the primary support pillar into the belly of the rig. "Stay close to the inner railing," she warned, pulling her tactical sidearm from her coat and keeping it aimed upward. "The structural integrity of the outer steps is completely compromised." We began the grueling ascent. Every step we took sent a loud metallic clang echoing up the empty shaft. The freezing wind howled through the rusted gaps in the walls, trying to tear us off the narrow staircase. My thighs burned and my lungs screamed for oxygen as we climbed higher and higher above the turning black ocean. After what felt like an hour of agonizing climbing, we finally reached the top landing. Before us was a massive, reinforced steel door entirely devoid of rust, looking completely out of place in the decaying environment. It was immaculate, sealed tight, and featured a sleek, black glass panel embedded in the center of the metal.
"The control tower," Camilla breathed, her chest heaving as she stepped up to the door. She holstered her weapon and pulled off her leather glove. She pressed her bare palm entirely flat against the black glass panel. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. Then, a sudden, sharp beep echoed in the silent corridor. The black glass illuminated with a brilliant, sweeping green laser that scanned the intricate lines of her hand. A mechanical, synthesized voice emanated from a hidden speaker. "Biometric sequence accepted. Welcome back, Miss Vance." Heavy internal deadbolts retracted with a series of loud, heavy thuds. The massive steel door hissed, breaking a pressurized seal, and slowly swung outward. We stepped into the control tower, Camilla raising her flashlight to sweep the room. But she didn't need it. The moment we crossed the threshold, the entire room suddenly flooded with brilliant, sterile white light. The control room was massive, lined floor to ceiling with rows of sleek, humming black server racks and glowing digital terminals. It was pristine, a multi-billion-dollar technological fortress hidden inside a decaying metal shell. But it wasn't empty. Sitting casually in the center of the room, on a sleek leather swivel chair, was a figure dressed in an immaculate white suit. The chair slowly spun around to face us. It was a woman with piercing gray eyes and a terrifyingly calm, polite smile. She was holding a steaming cup of tea in one hand and a suppressed silver pistol in the other. "You really do have your grandfather's dramatic flair, Camilla," Victoria Sterling murmured smoothly, taking a slow sip of her tea. "But I am afraid you are approximately 20 minutes too late." The pristine white light of the server room felt blinding after the grueling hour we had spent climbing through the freezing darkness of the rusted shaft. I stopped dead in my tracks, my hand instinctively dropping toward the tactical sidearm holstered at my hip. But Camilla's arm shot out instantly, barring my path and silently ordering me to freeze. Victoria Sterling sat in the center of the multi-billion-dollar ghost ship, looking as though she were enjoying high tea in an exclusive London parlor. The suppressed silver pistol resting casually on her crossed knee was aimed directly at the center of Camilla's chest. "How did you get in here?" Camilla demanded, her voice an absolute frigid whip crack in the silent room. "The biometric seal on that door hasn't been breached in 10 years. Victoria offered a soft, patronizing smile, carefully setting her delicate porcelain teacup onto the edge of a humming black server rack. "You place far too much faith in the unbreakable nature of your grandfather's toys, Camilla. A biometric scanner reads a pulse, a temperature, and a specific arrangement of capillaries. It is a brilliant piece of security against thieves, mercenaries, and corporate spies. But it is entirely useless against a thermal lancing drone equipped with a localized electromagnetic pulse." I'll good Victoria, noticing for the first time the massive, jagged hole melted directly through the titanium plating of the far wall. They hadn't bypassed the heavy steel door we just walked through. They had simply cut through the outer hull of the platform using military hardware that technically didn't exist yet on the public market. "You said we were 20 minutes too late," Camilla stated, her eyes flicking toward the massive central terminal behind Victoria. The enormous glass screen of the main console was entirely dark, save for a single blinking red prompt waiting for a biometric input. "The terminal is still locked, Victoria. You haven't initialized the Black Ledger. You don't have the ghost accounts." Victoria chuckled, a dry, elegant sound that sent a terrifying shiver down my spine. "I am 20 minutes too late to intercept the localized lockdown protocol. I arrived with a team of 12 elite operators, expecting to simply pry the server blades from their physical housing and leave. But your grandfather was a thoroughly paranoid old bastard. She gestured casually to the glowing black racks surrounding us. The moment my men breached the outer hole, the internal sensors detected the sudden pressure drop. The system immediately initiated a failsafe. The physical servers were instantly dropped into the pressurized titanium capsule 100 feet below the ocean floor. My men are currently in submersibles trying to cut through the underwater vault, but the metal is regenerating its thermal shielding faster than they can melt it. Victoria stood up slowly, smoothing the pristine lapels of her white suit, the silver pistol never wavering from its target. "So, I am afraid we are at a rather tedious stalemate. I cannot physically take the servers, and you cannot leave this room alive. Unless," Victoria purred, stepping closer, "you walk over to that terminal, place your hand on the glass, and manually recall the servers to the surface." I watched the muscles in Camilla's jaw clench tight. She was the ultimate chess player, but Victoria Sterling had just logicked the entire board over. "And if I refuse?" Camilla asked, her voice dropping into a dangerous, icy register. "If I let the servers rot at the bottom of the ocean?" "Then you walk away with nothing, Victoria." Victoria didn't look angry. She looked entirely, terrifyingly amused. "I possess $1 trillion in liquid assets, Camilla. I don't need the money inside the black ledger. I need the absolute leverage it represents. I need the blackmail files on every corrupt politician, every compromised judge, and every illegal arms dealer your family has ever funded." She took a slow, calculated step forward, her piercing gray eyes shifting away from Camilla and locking directly onto me. "But if you refuse to unlock it, I will simply shoot your beautiful little escort in the kneecap." My breath caught sharply in my throat, my blood running entirely cold. "And then I will shoot her in the other knee. And I will continue to systematically dismantle her until you decide that a hard drive is not worth watching the woman you love bleed out on a dirty metal floor." The absolute sociopathic calm in her voice made the threat infinitely more terrifying than if she had screamed it. Camilla stepped instantly in front of me, completely shielding my body with her own, her hands curled into tight, shaking fists at her sides. "If you touch her, Victoria, I will wipe the servers. I know the emergency purge code. I will burn the ledger to ash before I ever let you touch it." Victoria sighed dramatically, as if she were dealing with a petulant, misbehaving child. Such fiery, exhausting theatrics. "Very well, Camilla. Let us test your resolve." Victoria raised the silver pistol, aiming it precisely at the small sliver of my shoulder that was visible behind Camilla. She didn't hesitate. She didn't count down. She simply pulled the trigger. The suppressed gunshot sounded like a sharp, violent whip crack in the enclosed, echoing room. Camilla moved with a blinding, desperate speed I didn't know she possessed. She shoved me violently to the side, throwing us both onto the hard metal grating, just as the bullet shattered the digital display panel directly behind where I had been standing. Sparks rained down over our heads as the screen exploded into a shower of black glass. "Stop!" Camilla screamed, scrambling to her knees and throwing her empty hands up into the air. She looked back at me, her eyes wide with absolute primal terror, checking frantically to ensure I hadn't been hit. I was shaking, my heart hammering a painful, erratic rhythm against my ribs, but I was entirely unharmed. "I will do it," Camilla gasped, turning her furious, tear-filled eyes back to the woman in the white suit. "I will initialize the terminal. Just put the gun down." Victoria smiled warmly, lowering the weapon slightly but keeping it fully prepped and ready to fire. A very wise, if somewhat delayed, decision. "Please be my guest." She gestured elegantly toward the massive, dark central terminal waiting in the center of the room. Camilla slowly stood up, refusing to break eye contact with Victoria as she reached down and helped me off the floor. She squeezed my hand once, a sharp, incredibly brief pulse of pressure that communicated an entire encyclopedia of silent intent. She wasn't surrendering. She was executing a lethal countermeasure. Camilla walked slowly past Victoria, her posture rigid, her face locked back into the impenetrable, flawless mask of the Ice Queen. She stood directly in front of the massive glass console. The single red prompt blinked rhythmically, waiting patiently for its master. "The biometric sequence requires a dual-stage authentication," Camilla stated coldly, her hands hovering delicately over the glass. "It requires my palm print and a verbal passcode established by my grandfather." "Then proceed," Victoria ordered, taking a step closer to watch the screen intently. Camilla placed her bare right hand entirely flat against the center of the dark glass. The terminal instantly hummed to life. A massive ring of deep blue light pulsed outward from her hand, scanning the unique biological signature of her skin. "Biometric match confirmed," the synthesized voice echoed loudly through the room. "Awaiting verbal authorization." Camilla took a deep breath, her glacial eyes locking onto the glowing blue screen. Authorization code. Icarus falling. The silence that followed stretched for a terrifying, agonizing second. Then the entire room completely changed. The pristine white lights illuminating the server racks instantly slammed off, plunging us into total, suffocating darkness. A split second later, the room was bathed in a violent, strobing crimson emergency light. A deafening, mechanical siren began to wail, vibrating violently through the steel floorboards and shaking the dust from the ceiling. Victoria stumbled backward, raising her pistol as she frantically scanned the flashing red shadows. "What did you do?" she shrieked, her aristocratic composure completely shattering in an instant. "I initialized the ledger," Camilla yelled over the blaring siren, stepping backward away from the terminal. "But I didn't use the standard access code. Icarus falling is the catastrophic containment protocol." Heavy steel blast shutters violently slammed down over the melted hole in the wall, sealing the breach completely tight. "The servers aren't coming up to the surface, Victoria. The entire titanium vault just detached from the rig. It is currently free-falling into the crushing depths of the Mariana Trench." Victoria stared at Camilla in absolute, unadulterated horror. "You just destroyed $1 trillion in leverage," Victoria whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow to the stomach. "I just removed your leverage," Camilla corrected, her voice dripping with lethal, venomous satisfaction. "But there is a secondary function to the Icarus protocol." The siren abruptly changed pitch, escalating into a rapid, frantic pulsing sound that hurt my ears. "To ensure no one could ever trace the terminal back to the sunken vault, the protocol also initiates a complete scuttling of the primary control tower." My eyes went wide in the strobing red light as the true meaning of her words finally sank in. Camilla hadn't just destroyed the Black Ledger, she had just triggered the self-destruct sequence of the entire oil rig, and the massive steel door we had used to enter the room had just locked itself permanently from the inside. The strobing crimson emergency light turned the pristine white server room into a mechanical, terrifying hellscape. The realization of her absolute, irreversible defeat finally shattered Victoria Sterling's flawless porcelain mask. She didn't look like a trillion-dollar syndicate leader anymore. She looked like a cornered, desperate animal trapped in a sinking cage. With a raw, furious scream that tore through her aristocratic composure, she raised the suppressed silver pistol, aiming it directly at Camilla's head. But I was already moving. I didn't try to draw the tactical sidearm from my hip. There was absolutely no time to clear the heavy leather holster. I launched my entire body forward, tackling Victoria around the waist just as her fingers slammed down on the trigger. The suppressed shot went wide, the bullet sparking violently against the reinforced steel ceiling above the server racks. We crashed hard onto the unyielding metal grating, the silver pistol skittering away from her hand and vanishing into the dark shadows beneath a humming terminal. Victoria fought back with a vicious, clawing ferocity, her manicured nails digging deep into the collar of my coat as she tried to throw me off. But she had spent her entire life destroying people from the comfortable safety of a mahogany desk in London. I had spent my life surviving the physical, unforgiving brutality of the underground world. I shifted my weight, pinning her completely to the metal floorboards, and drove my elbow hard into the nerve cluster on her right shoulder. She gasped in sudden, blinding pain, her grip instantly going slack as her arm went numb. "Nadia, move!"
Camilla's voice sliced sharply through the deafening, blaring wail of the mechanical siren. I scrambled off Victoria, diving toward the center console where Camilla was already ripping open a heavy maintenance panel set flush into the floor. My grandfather didn't build a self-destruct sequence without installing a backdoor exit, Camilla yelled, hauling a heavy iron grate aside to reveal a dark, incredibly narrow ventilation chute. It leads directly down through the primary support strut to the coolant intake valves near the service dock. Below us, deep within the submerged bowels of the oil rig, a massive, deep bass explosion shook the entire structure. The metal floorboards groaned and buckled under our feet as the primary support pillars began to catastrophically fail. "We have exactly 3 minutes before the ocean swallows this entire platform," Camilla stated, her eyes wild with adrenaline and an absolute fierce will to survive. She gestured frantically for me to enter the maintenance chute first. I didn't hesitate, sliding feet first into the tight, freezing metal tube. The pungent, suffocating smell of ancient machine oil, rust, and raw ocean water instantly filled my lungs. Camilla followed immediately behind me, sliding into the chute. Just before she pulled the heavy iron grate shut above us, I looked back into the strobing, blood-red room. Victoria Sterling was struggling to her knees, her pristine white suit stained with dark grease, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror as she realized she was permanently locked in a sinking steel coffin. The heavy grate slammed shut with a metallic clang, plunging us into absolute claustrophobic darkness. We slid down the steep, slick metal chute at a terrifying velocity, bouncing violently against the narrow, rusted walls. The mechanical screaming of the dying oil rig echoed all around us, the horrific sound of tearing metal and rushing water growing louder by the second. I hit the end of the chute hard, tumbling out of the darkness and crash onto the rusted metal grating of the hidden service dock. Camilla crashed into me a fraction of a second later, and we scrambled to our feet, gasping for the freezing, salty air. The massive steel pillars around us were shrieking, bending at impossible angles under the catastrophic structural failure of the platform above. Massive chunks of rusted debris were raining down from the ceiling, crashing violently into the churning, black ocean water. We sprinted toward the matte black interceptor, throwing ourselves over the slick metal railing just as a massive steel support beam crashed onto the dock exactly where we had been standing. Camilla didn't bother with the ignition keys. She slammed her bare palm against the emergency biometric override panel on the console. The massive twin engines roared to life with a deafening, beautiful thunder that drowned out the sound of the collapsing rig. I grabbed the heavy tactical knife from my belt and slashed through the thick mooring line in a single, desperate, adrenaline-fueled motion. "Hold on!" Camilla screamed, slamming the dual throttles completely forward. The military-grade interceptor shot out from beneath the collapsing rig like a bullet leaving a chamber. We hit the open ocean, flying over the massive, churning waves just as the primary deck of the decommissioned platform violently imploded behind us. A massive, blinding fireball erupted into the morning sky, tearing the rusted steel behemoth into 1,000 burning, twisted pieces. The shockwave hit us a second later, physically pushing the heavy interceptor forward and sending a wall of freezing salt water crashing over the dark hull. We kept moving, tearing through the dispersing fog at maximum speed, putting miles of dark, empty ocean between us and the fiery wreckage of the Sterling Syndicate's ambitions. When the burning glow of the rig finally faded into a small, flickering orange speck on the horizon, Camilla slowly pulled the throttles back. The engines dropped to a low, steady hum, leaving us in the heavy, exhausted silence of the open sea. I collapsed against the side of the bulletproof cockpit, my entire body shaking uncontrollably as the adrenaline finally burned out of my system. We were alive. We had actually survived a direct confrontation with the apex predators of the financial world. Camilla engaged the highly advanced autopilot system, locking our coordinates toward a safe harbor, and walked slowly over to me. Her breath was coming in ragged gasps, her pale blonde hair plastered to her face by the freezing ocean spray. She slid down the bulkhead, sitting on the deck right next to me, and pulled me tightly against her side. I rested my head on her shoulder, closing my eyes as the deep, intoxicating scent of bergamot mixed with the sharp smell of gunsmoke and salt. "The ledger is gone," I whispered, staring out at the endless expanse of gray water. "Victoria is gone. The blackmail files are resting at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. We are finally free, Camilla. Camilla was silent for a long moment, her cold fingers gently stroking my damp hair, grounding me in the terrifying reality of our survival. Then, a low, dark chuckle rumbled deep in her chest. I pulled back slightly, looking up at her face in confusion, my brow furrowing. The Ice Queen was smiling, a terrifying, brilliantly wrecked curve of her lips that made my breath catch in my throat. "You really think I would destroy $1 trillion in absolute leverage, Nadia?" she murmured softly, her eyes gleaming with a lethal, mesmerizing light. My heart skipped a beat, a sudden, thrilling realization washing over my exhausted mind. "Icarus Protocol didn't destroy the servers," I breathed, my eyes widening in profound shock. "Oh, the protocol definitely dropped the physical servers into the trench," Camilla confirmed, the smile never leaving her face. But the moment I placed my hand on that glass, the terminal executed a massive, highly encrypted data dump directly to a decentralized, untraceable cloud server I established 3 years ago. She reached into the inner pocket of her dark trench coat and pulled out a small, sleek black phone. "Victoria Sterling thought she was cornering me, forcing me to surrender my grandfather's legacy. But she just watched me secure the ultimate weapon while simultaneously burying the only physical evidence of its existence." I stared at the Alpha Queen, utterly mesmerized by the sheer, devastating magnitude of her intellect. She now held the darkest, most ruinous secrets of every powerful person on the planet. She wasn't just a billionaire heiress anymore. She was the single most dangerous woman in the world, and she had orchestrated the entire illusion flawlessly. Suddenly, the sleek black phone in her hand vibrated sharply. The screen illuminated in the dim cabin, displaying a highly encrypted text message. It wasn't a message from Elias confirming our extraction point. It wasn't a localized proximity alert from the boat's radar. Camilla's victorious, wicked smile instantly vanished, replaced by a look of absolute, chilling horror. I watched the color drain entirely from her face, her glacial eyes locking onto the short string of green text. "What is it?" I asked, a fresh, paralyzing wave of ice-cold dread flooding my veins. "Who is texting? That secure frequency?" Camilla slowly turned the phone toward me, her hand visibly trembling for the very first time since the night we met. The message was only 2 lines long. "Beautiful explosion, little sister. I see you found grandfather's toy. Now bring it to me." I stared at the screen, the freezing ocean wind suddenly feeling like ice in my lungs. "Little sister," I whispered, looking back up at Camilla's pale, terrified face. "My brother, Julian?" Camilla rasped, her voice completely hollow, entirely devoid of the invincible Alpha Queen aura. "He died in a private plane crash 10 years ago." The ocean around us suddenly felt infinitely darker, and the lethal game of power we thought we had just won had only just begun. Just when we thought the nightmare was finally over, that single text message changes absolutely everything. I am still shivering from that cliffhanger. If you are as hooked on this mystery as I am, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss the next episode. And I want to know, where in the world are you listening from today? Drop your city or country in the comments below, and I'll see you in episode 6.